Hey guys, it's Bare Bones. Just kidding, it's Mythos. And today we're going to be discussing the inventory that I have for my Dex build. Let's just get right back into it. Actually, first, speaking of Bare Bones, before we start, shout out to Bare Bones. He's the one that had a video on this inventory originally, and shout out to another player, Glinknar, who is the maker of the original inventory setup that Bare Bones is discussing. There will be a link in the description showing Bare Bones' video. Definitely please check that out, especially before mine, honestly. But anyways, let's get into the ins and outs of this inventory. So first of all, I showed somebody this image. They told me I look like a psychopath. I look like a crazy person. This is a terrible way of showing how an inventory works, and I honestly agree. So we're gonna do it in video instead, for people to kind of learn in a bit more of a just a better manner, honestly. So let's get started. First of all, I have 4 roots in this inventory. What is a root? A root is a weapon that I'm swapping off of temporarily and then swapping back to. So there are 4 roots in general in this 5x5 space. It's the 5x5 space ends here and starts here. So let's start. We have the wakizashi, the pike, the twin bird, and the lance. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, if I pressed left on the lance, I would go to Claws of Night. Same thing for the kite shield, I would have Claws of Night. Same thing for the wakizashi, Claws of Night. And same thing for the pike, I would have Claws of Night. And same thing applies for everything else. Up would be parry, right would be Falx, down would be Sword of Night. And that's kind of how this inventory works out. There's a few different tidbits here and there. For instance, this lance actually has a down Falx swap. And why is that? Well, that's because my right Falx swap, that is usually Falx, is instead replaced with a Misery Cord. That is because of this halberd up here. This wakizashi does not have a parry swap, even though it's a root and everything else does have a parry swap. And that's because if I'm using the wakizashi, I would typically have a shield with maybe Care Retaliation on it. So I wouldn't need a parry swap if I already have the shield equipped. So instead, it's replaced with a halberd swap. And then this halberd swap actually has its own parry shield swap up here. Pressing R2 will bring me down to this Misery Cord, which is why it's there. That also applies to every other parry shield here. So if I were to play on my Twin Bird Kite shield, swap up to my parry shield, if I press R2 after parrying them, I'll go to a Misery Cord. And the same thing goes for the Spanish Knight shield and the Spanish Knight shield. Now let's talk a bit about the filler content here. So filler consists of this Crisp Blade Circ, this Heavy Crossbow, and this Spread Crossbow. The reason why this Falx is not considered filler content is because this halberd would be able to press right from it and go to the Falx. Having Falx swap is probably one of the most important swaps in my personal opinion. That's why all of my roots have it. Now let's talk a bit about the trigger swaps. Instead of pressing D-pad, for these swaps, I would press a trigger, or maybe and then a D-pad. So, R2 from here would bring me... Oh wait, sorry, this is a root. R2 from here would bring me to a Tooth Whip. And if I press down from that, I would get a Hand of Melania. Press L2, I would go back to the wakizashi. So, Tooth Whip, wakizashi. Pike, Tooth Whip, pike. Lance, Tooth Whip, pike. And if I press, like, let's say I want to swap to Hand of Melania out of my lance, I would just press R2 and then down, and then up and then L2. Really, really simple stuff. Because pressing R2 will always bring you down 5 slots in your inventory, and pressing L2 will bring you 5 slots up in your inventory. So whatever you were on before, as long as you press the opposite trigger, you will go to the previous weapon you were on before. Same thing applies here for my up triggers, L2. We'll have an HTS swap for every one of these roots. And if I pressed up from any of these L2s, I would get a Great Bow, giving me easy access to both an HTS and a Great Bow. This Pestglaive here is actually for a different thing. It's equivalent to my Spiral Horn here and my Twin Bird here, where I would put this on my back if I am two-handing a weapon in my offhand, which I'll get to in a bit. Why would I have this on my back? well, it gives me a little bit more, just a smidge more elemental damage negation, as you can see here on the right side of the screen. Alright, now that we have that out of the way, let's explain this area up here. There's only a few more things to go from. So, first of all, Noble Slender Sword. This is considered a root. If I were to want to use Power Stance Straight Swords here, this is exactly where I would go to get my root. I'm only using this because I have enough space up here to actually have this set up here. There's enough dead space for me to actually have another root. Although it's a bit more weird because it doesn't have all the exact same muscle memory as the other ones. It still has Falx and it still has Sword of Night though, which is awesome. And it even has a parry swap. Its L2 is also an HDS, but I would have to press down on the D-pad twice to go back to the Noble Slender Sword, because if I L2 swapped, boom, I would press R2 and go to the Spread Crossbow, which is not what I want. So, I would have to press down twice on the D-pad. And I didn't explain these yet, but from my Stitcher swaps, if I were to press down, I would actually get a Vow of the Indomitable swap. I only have this because, well, Golden Crux users. So, that's consistent throughout most of my HDSs, except for this one. As you can see here, it's below every one of my Stitchers, except for this one right here. It's only like that because there's a Falx swap in the way, which is keyed to my Noble Slender Sword. But just press right instead, and I'll still get the thing. So only it takes a little bit of eyeballing. Most of it is still muscle memory at this point, especially the Great Bow swap being consistent after every trigger swap. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Why do I have a twin bird in my main hand in the thumbnail of the video? Well, if I were to have this in my main hand, and then have any two-handed weapon, let's say I have a Stitcher in my two-hand, I now have the twin bird in my main hand and the Stitcher in my offhand, yet I'm two-handing the Stitcher, and that's because I will still have all of the swaps available. Right would be Falx, down would be Knight, left would be Claws, and up would be Parry. And why is that good? Because no matter what weapon I'm two-handing, whether it be a pike, a thrusting sword, a KGS, Rakshasa, Pada, whatever, I will always have the same swaps for those weapons because of my main hand Twin Bird Kite Shield. And also, if I were to, let's say, swap to Falx here, do the Ash War, and I can just two-hand handy tech back into the HTS. I don't have to do a swap to get back to my actual weapon I was using before that, because I didn't swap off of it. I just swapped what I wasn't using, the Twin Bird. So even with this, you can also make it so you don't have to do another swap after your Ash War. You can just find time in neutral to go back to the shield when you're ready. It's perfect, it's clean, and it just makes a lot of sense. This is an edited version of the original inventory that Glinknar made, and for my reference also, this whole area in offhand can also be gone. You can also press L2 from here to go to one of these ice ring hatchets up here. I actually only have 4 rows, as my 5th row is only daggers. I'll be changing that so I have 5 rows of ice ring hatchets. That was a bit of an oversight on my end, but the spirit's there. That is about it when it comes to this inventory. There will be a link in the description for the Bare Bones video once again. Shout out to him, and of course the inventory that I used. I used Amelia's build planner. Everybody should be using that, so that link will be there too for you guys. But yeah, that is it explaining the inventory.